Hi, I'm Pastor Steve Talmage of Love of Christ Lutheran Church in Mesa, Arizona. Each week, Pastor Nanette Christofferson and I try to provide a brief introduction to two of the upcoming lectionary readings for Sunday. In this lesson, we're going to look at the Old Testament reading for the first Sunday of Advent, Isaiah 2, verses 1 to 5. This is for Sunday, November 27th, 2022. Just some background on Isaiah. First, Isaiah is one of the four major prophets in the Jewish Bible, our Old Testament. He joins Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Daniel, and they're called major prophets due to the length of time their works cover, not because they're more important than the others. The prophets speak primarily to the time leading up to and during and after the 12 tribes are exiled from the Promised Land. And their calls were always challenging. Isaiah, he's dealing with both exiles of the Assyrian Exile. That took place in 722 to 721 before Common Era, where the 10 northern tribes that split after Solomon died. There was civil war between the northern tribes and 2 southern tribes of Judah and Benjamin. And they split into 2 nations with different kings and different worship places. And that happened. The northern tribes were taken away. Assyria was on its way to the southern tribes, to Jerusalem. And then they had internal problems. And the empire actually collapsed because the Babylonians came and took over them. Well, then the Babylonians, on their way to Egypt, they accomplish what the Assyrians couldn't, and they overtake the 2 tribes in the south in 586 BCE. So this is a difficult time period that these prophets are speaking to, and Isaiah's in that mix. Isaiah 6 describes his call to be a prophet, and it's stated that it's during the year of King Uzziah's death, which we can date to 740 before Common Era. Scholars now divide Isaiah into 3 basic sections. The first Isaiah is chapters 1 to 39. Second Isaiah is chapters 40 to 55, and third Isaiah is chapters 56 to 66. The first faced the Assyrian threat. The second was written during the Babylonian exile. And the third was written about the time of the return, because the Persians overtook the Babylonians, and in 538 BCE, King Cyrus gave permission to the Jewish people to return to their original homeland. And that took place, and you had the rebuilding of Solomon's temple that was done during Ezra and Nehemiah. And you had what happened to be, the revival of Israel, but it was not without its challenges or problems. Chapter 1 of Isaiah, Isaiah addresses the sordid corruption of Judah, the southern kingdom. Jerusalem is in the territory of Judah. They have rejected God. They're morally degraded, socially unjust, and religiously hypocritical. So you can imagine that it was tough circumstances. Isaiah brings a word of judgment. A swift and terrible judgment is coming to those who refuse to return to the way of the Lord. And one of the words often attached to prophets is the word repent, which is basically making a U-turn, change of direction, change of mindset, and to return back to the ways of God. And those ways are clearly revealed in the Torah, in the 10 Commandments. You shall have no other gods before me. And as Jesus would summarize after this horrible history during the time of Isaiah, you're to love God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and love your neighbor as yourself. The next section of Isaiah, chapters 2 to 4, talk about God's coming day of peace and judgment. In these chapters, Isaiah looks far ahead to the time when Jerusalem will become the city of God for the people of all nations. All nations. But before that, God will execute fierce judgment on all the wickedness and pride which pollute his people. For evil has no place in the renewed city. And as ancient Near East religions have evolved and developed, and Israel and Judaism being part of that evolution, there's always this image of, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, and this idea of purging the bad so that the new can come. And we recognize now with the coming of Jesus, the witness of the New Testament scriptures, that all of us are sinners, and all of us have that inward bent in us. And outside of God's grace, we all would be condemned, damned, judged. But God instead chooses the path of grace. But as people listen to these prophets, you hear a lot of strong words of, you better get your act together or else. And as they would look back after the exile, they would know, why did this happen to us? And they could look and listen to Isaiah and recognize that with Isaiah and the other prophets, they had failed to walk in the ways of God. So, let's get to our reading. Chapter 2, verse 1. The word that Isaiah, son of Amos, saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem. So, we're focused on the southern kingdom, the northern kingdom. Their capital, the capital there is Shechem, and their worship spot is Mount Gerizim. 10 tribes are represented up there. In the southern kingdom, you have Benjamin, and you have Judah, and you have Jerusalem, with the temple still standing at this point in chapter 2. Verse 2, in the days to come, the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established as the highest of the mountains, and shall be raised above the hills. All the nations shall stream to it. This is again, when you look at world history, you look at world religions. Most world religions, there's an attachment to high places, with the god or gods being up above us. And so the higher we go, the closer we can be to God. So even in the construction of the great European cathedrals, you have the high spires that lead up, causing us all to look upwards. Mount Zion was a high hill. Not the highest hill in Israel, Mount Hermon is, but Mount Zion, where the temple was built, it sits on a hill, and there are valleys surrounding it. Strategically, it's easier to protect the city when you have valleys around you, because your enemies have to come up towards you, and you have the advantage of height, looking down. But in this is a promise that there's going to be nations streaming to the place of God on his high mountain. We go to verse 3. Many people shall come and say, come, let us go up the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us his ways, that we may walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth instruction and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. And this reimagines the covenant that God made with Abram and Sarah, that I'm going to bless you to be a blessing. The whole reason of picking a particular people was so that God could model and demonstrate a relationship with a particular people that could then extend that blessing of God in the relationship with their neighbor. And so here we have a recalling of that original covenant of God's people through Abraham and Sarah, and that the people from the house of Jacob, which is Israel, they're going to see God's ways being taught. They're going to be seeing people walking on the paths of God. And it's going to come forth out of Jerusalem. Verse 4. He shall judge between the nations, and shall arbitrate for many peoples. They shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. Boy, 2,000 years now, really, in this context, you're talking about 2600 years. These words are still a witness to what God would desire. That we don't continue to arm up and go and destroy our enemies, but somehow as people who are all created in the image of God, we're not learning war anymore. We're figuring out how we can live together in the ways of God and walk the pathways of God that have at the core of it, you love God with all you got and you love your neighbor as yourself. But we struggle mightily even today as Russia and Ukraine, North Korea, China, and Taiwan, just even in our own country, the divisions among race and political parties and just the attitude of, and edginess and anger. But this is the vision that Isaiah gives, that the people of God are not going to weaponize, but they're going to watch God arbitrate and decide how we can live together. And we know the answer: love and forgiveness. That's the word and witness of Jesus. Verse 5, O house of Jacob, come, let us walk in the light of the Lord. As we listen and live our lives in November of 2022, as we struggle with the divisions, the polarizations, the attitudes, the language, the strife that continues to play out around us, the invitation from Isaiah in the season of Advent, it is a season of light, is how do we walk in the light of the Lord? And when Jesus was asked that question, he answered it very simply. We are to love the Lord your God with all our heart, mind, and soul. And we're to love our neighbor as ourselves, because we're all created in the image of God. And therefore, we shouldn't need weapons of mass destruction. We shouldn't need weapons that will only cause more division among us. We have to find a pathway forward where we're able to live as neighbor and where we can put behind the histories of hardship and vengeance and distrust and figure a way where we can celebrate the image of God in all of us and the bounty that God has graciously provided us on this planet, so that all have daily bread, so that all have dignity, so that all have adequate care and shelter and opportunity. I know I may be wishing in the sky, but when we listen to Isaiah's words here, pointing to a future, and then we look at the words of Jesus, am I really that crazy? God bless you as we journey forward in Advent. Take care.